Hello and welcome once again to the Near Futurist podcast. My name is Guy Clapperton. If you're a regular listener, you'll be aware of what comes first, so here is a quick plug for my media training service at Clapperton Media Training. Do you want to sound as confident as my interviewee in this episode? If you talk to the press or other media, are you worried you'll be misquoted, or they'll just publish their story and not yours? Clapperton Media Associates can help with coaching. Drop me a note, guy@clapperton.co.uk, and we'll arrange a time for an exploratory call. Now, back to the podcast. And that's enough of that. This week, we're having another look at cybersecurity. As I said last week, I've been writing about it for over 30 years, and people are still using their pets' names as passwords, which tells me something very important. Nobody listens to a word I say. My guest, however, is pretty steeped in the area with more than a decade at Veeam, that's Veam, working her way from systems engineering through to product strategy and now operating at board level. She is currently Field CTO, Chief Technology Officer, helping organizations get to grips with everything from ransomware to major outages, and she's also a strong advocate for women in tech. Her name is EmileeTellez. Emilee, thank you very much for coming. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Emilee, for someone who isn't a tech expert, how do you explain what a field CTO actually does? Are you the person who goes out and fixes the internet when it breaks down?
It's always a good one because I feel like that is sometimes what my family thinks that I do whenever I talk about my job in tech. But really, if we were to just boil it down, right, I like to think of myself more as like a translator. So I operate with different customers within organizations to help those in technical roles really speak the same language to those that control the pocketbooks, that control the funding, that need to make decisions based off of the information that they're providing. So I help them to kind of distinguish how do we take the technical bits of something maybe as simple as, hey, we have a critical vulnerability within our disaster recovery environment, and translate that into how does this impact the overall business, and what should the board or the C-level executives be thinking about in order to remediate it. So that's kind of where I sit. I sit in this fun role of being a translator for organizations.
Thank you for that. Now, your recent research shows this thing that's been described as a confidence gap. I'm wondering why chief executives and other board members are so sure their companies are safe, while the people actually working in the IT engine room, if you like, are constantly terrified. First of all, tell me if that reflects the reality of it at all, or is it just something I've read somewhere? And is that changing? Can we expect to see that changing in the near future?
Oh, 100%. So you're right on the mark in terms of why there is this gap between people that have hands-on keyboard versus those that are making the decisions. And I think you could kind of think about it in a way of a game of telephone. Us that are working day in, day out with the infrastructure, with the networking, with the applications, with everything that is fully connected into our world. And the way we have to distill that information to those above us for them to make decisions and for them to be confident in the ability in which we're able to recover or to bounce back after some type of incident. I mean, it's very clear that there is some things that kind of get lost in translation. And so the report that you're referring to, it's the Data Trust and Resilience report. So that's the one we actually went through. We surveyed over 900 senior IT and security leaders globally. And yes, they kind of all agree. 90% of them think that they can confidently recover from a cyber incident within their actual defined recovery time objectives. But then when you dig down deeper into the data and you ask them questions about, well, when you were faced with a ransomware incident or when you had a data loss event, then the true numbers start to kind of come out, right? Essentially, with some that said, actually, well, when we did have a cyber incident, we were only able to recover 28% of all of our data. And if we actually were to look at some of those numbers, even 44% out of that 28% were able to recover less than 3/4 of it, right? So the numbers in the data essentially doesn't lie. It essentially starts showing this reflection of where organizations think that they are based upon what they know versus those that are actually having to put the actions put in place are showing where they truly end up being. So It's one of those items that, you have kind of two completely different bars that are being set dependent on where you sit within the organization. And some people are maybe clearing the first one in terms of like, hey, we have a backup or we have something that we can recover to. And they're calling it a win based off of that, but not thinking about all the different processes and all the new systems and all the keys that need to be turned in order for that process to meet an SLA or an objective that they have put aside by the business.
Is this partly the IT department's fault, do you think? And let me qualify that before I start blaming people. That department in most organizations has a case history of explaining why something can't be done or why it's impossible. I'm old enough to remember the fuss about the year 2000, and there was a real issue there. It wasn't just hype. There really was a case of, we don't know what those dates are going to do in the year 2000. That's a long time ago. But since then, and probably since before, the IT department has always sat there saying, this isn't going to work, it's going to be terrible. And then they somehow pull it out of the bag at the last minute. Do you think
Mhm.
that history does the IT department any favors?
No, you went back far, but I mean, we could even go back just even as recently as like a few years ago, right? There was a global disruption that happened that was all due to a bad patch that went out that took a lot of Windows systems offline. And every single organization, if you were running this bit of software, was impacted. And so your data operational strategy was tested that day. If you knew how to recover from backups, if you knew how to recover based off of restorations or replicas and how to go through the process of restoring if it was impacted in the cloud versus sitting on prem versus a physical server. A lot of teams actually had to run their full DR strategy that day for something that maybe wasn't planned. It wasn't part of the DR strategy, but it ended up happening to them. So I will say that maybe 2 years ago, a lot of people had to put a stress test into what their operational resilience looked like, and they identified those gaps right away. And I think going back to your role in terms of, the IT teams, that essentially it's probably what they've been saying for a long time. We are going to have an outage. And do we not know how we're going to be able to recover? And this just helped them prove this is where we're at, where we're behind, and this is where we need the help in order to get the business to where it needs to be.
Fair enough. You said mentioned DR quite a few times there. I'm assuming that's data recovery, just for,
That is,
in case any
yeah,
listeners are.
data recovery, disaster recovery. Yes.
Yeah, that's actually fine. Nothing to do with doctors. That's great.
Yes.
If we think of AI agents, if you like, as almost incredibly fast interns, I'm looking at the role of AI in here and how it speeds things up. What happens when an AI agent accidentally deletes an entire virtual filing cabinet? Do we have a cancel button for AI mistakes? Where does AI fit into this?
So AI is a very interesting one because, as I'm sure you know, everybody is racing to do something with AI. And if you're not doing something with AI, then you've already fallen behind. It's kind of what all organizations are feeling the pressure on right now. And your analogy on it being more of like an intern is 100% right because it is an intern. It is something that is brand new to the environment and they are making decisions and they're making decisions at kind of like a light speed. And the scary part is that when you have a human intern and they make a mistake, well, it's easy just to figure out that it was this one mistake. We could probably trace back the steps that they did and then be able to rectify that decision or that accident or mistake that had taken place. But when you add AI into the mix and you add it in with an AI agent, it can execute that same wrong decision, that same mistake thousands of times. And sometimes it can be done before anybody else actually notices that something's off. So that cancel button, it's not just like it's canceled and it's done with. Now we need to actually go back and we need to fix the agent. We need to fix the items that it made a mistake on. If it deleted that data, if it destroyed that data, if it corrupted it, well, how do we go back and how do we get it back to its premium working state? And then how do we go back and validate all the outputs so that way that decision, that mistake that it made doesn't happen again? Because you could restore the data, but if you don't fix the original problem, we're just going to be back to the same problem. So there is this whole notion in terms of organizations are figuring out that they're rolling out some of these AI initiatives and they're realizing that, there's not the right guardrails that are being put in place. There's not the right governance. We're missing full visibility into this layer. And though they're excited because they want to see the productivity gains that maybe they see competitors doing or they hear about in the news, they have to kind of take a step back and understand the overall governance, safety, and security to make sure that they're able to keep pace with what it is that they're trying to actually get to at the end state, right? And so there's this risk that's associated to it that I think organizations are still trying to tap into and really understand when it comes to overall AI initiatives.
The other thing about AI, of course, is that people use their own apps. ChatGPT is very famous at the
Yeah.
time that we're broadcasting. People also are very fond of Claude. Suddenly, that's a name I've heard a lot in the last few months. I've seen research mentioning overall that 90% of company data is dark, meaning we don't know what it is because people are using their own apps because of working from home, because bring your own technology, that sort of thing. A lot of organizations, if they've been around for a while, must be like having a messy attic full of boxes. You don't know which ones are real. You don't know which ones are useful. So how does that make a company any more or less vulnerable from a security point of view? What should people be doing?
Yeah, so it's a good question and it's a great analogy because I think, in general state, we're all human and we're all going to be prone to hoarding or to keeping certain things that maybe we don't necessarily need for long portions of time. And so like that addict example or even a garage, they're perfect metaphors in terms of like how even some companies operate when it comes to their own data. They don't know if this particular piece of item or these files or these folders are going to eventually be useful one day. But also, if you think about it from a long-term perspective, if you've done a very great job of being meticulous in the types of data that you keep and keeping that fully organized, well, you might actually have your organization's DNA just sitting there in those boxes that could be cracked open and be utilized for some additional competitive advantage. So there's always some real excitement around your data and what your data is capable of doing, especially when it comes to AI. But if we were to flip that and think about it in terms of if you're not doing anything with that data and it's sitting there in that stagnant state, sitting upstairs inside of that attic, and everybody has essentially forgot about it. If we think about external threat vectors, a threat actor, an attacker, well, they're betting on you having an attic full of boxes that you probably never opened, and they're hoping that you're going to have something that's going to be really valuable in there. And if they have something that they find that is valuable in there, there is probably pretty good chance that that data or whatever it is isn't protected. You're not going to even know that it was missing, and they're going to bet that you're going to pay a lot of money to try to get it back. And so that's how we kind of see some of these breaches start to pay out with a lot of the inherent risks that comes with some of the data that organizations are hoarding and keeping for long periods of time, right? So it's kind of like this two-part problem. You want to keep your data because you want to be able to unlock all these wonderful advantages that it can possibly bring, especially if you're doing the right practices around due diligence and ensuring that you are categorizing it, you're providing context, you're doing all the right things in terms of making sure that it is a valuable solution. But you also want to make sure that you're not opening yourself up to more security risk. You mentioned ChatGPT, you mentioned some of the other ones out there. There are these shadow AI capabilities of which an organization might go and or a user might go unwillingly and put some of this information out onto the public internet through these public LLMs. And then now all of a sudden, your organization can be susceptible to some sort of other type of trust or loss. So there's a lot of different motions, and compliance risk becomes the biggest piece that is brought to the forefront for a lot of organizations. And so for me, when we're having these types of conversations around the data that organizations are keeping, you have to do the best practice. You have to go through and you have to catalog it. You have to go through a full data discovery. It is going to be a long period for some, depending on how well or how much data you have. But it's the only way that you can really understand whether or not you might have any exposures, if you might have any legal ramifications or reputational consequences that could play out in the event that you didn't even know that it was up there. So Essentially just comes down to like you can't protect if you can't see it. So you have to put the best practice in to actually start making sure that you start going through those boxes.
I know you lead cyber recovery workshops. When a business owner gets that dreaded call, they've been hacked, their IT team has to tell them the data is starting to vanish. What's the first thing they should do?
So usually, hopefully they have planned for this. And if they haven't planned for this, my first recommendation to them is to actually just stop whatever it is that they think that they should do. Because for a lot of organizations, especially some that haven't practiced that muscle memory of going through a process of what happens during a breach or during an incident, they might just jump to trying to fix the situation without properly going through the process that they should for an incident response. They should go through and make sure that are we containing what was possibly affected? Do we actually understand or know what was impacted at this point in time? I've seen many organizations that have failed at this point because they rushed to try to be the hero. They rushed to try to save the organization, to stop the encryption, to stop the threat actor, or whatever it may be that's going on. And during that process, they ended up causing even more damage, meaning they ended up reinfecting a new environment that was completely blind to the original scope that was impacted originally. They've seen things where essentially now they are liable because they posted something into the media, which then leaked back. And now all of a sudden the company's reputation is on the line. So there's so many things that go into this response when it comes to an incident. So my always first, my first thing that I always give to any customer is number one, stop. You can't panic in these situations. You need to make decisions under calmness, and you follow the playbook that you have put in place, and you follow it to a T, especially if you've practiced for it. If you've practiced for it and you have a playbook, then you know what those decision frameworks are going to look like throughout the time of that entire incident. But if you haven't gone through that process, the worst thing you can do is try to have multiple people working across multiple different facets, and then all of a sudden, you are missing things in terms of the actual impact of systems that are being affected and items like that. So there's a whole notion in terms of you can't panic. You essentially just need to go through your process and validate that process, and then also involve third parties, involve partners, involve others. They're all here to kind of help you to essentially get to a good state of where you want to be at during that time.
I think one of the strongest points to pick out of that is that if you haven't had a crisis, but you don't have a crisis plan, plan now, because but the best time to put a crisis plan in place is when there is no crisis, because you can actually have time to think about it. That's very, very important and a great first
Absolutely.
step. Um, Inevitably, that involves some downtime for regular business, if there's any such thing, really. That's lost money, it's angry customers. In 2026, looking forward to the future as well, how long is too long to be offline before you can say you never really recover?
It depends on the actual business. The windows kind of get shorter every year depending on the practices that you put in place, right? There's high availability, there's disaster recovery, there's cyber recovery, there's AI resilience, there's all these different acronyms and terms that organizations kind of put in place in terms of like, this is what our crisis management plan looks like. If something were to happen here, this is the process that we follow, and this is the SLA we determine from the business for when we actually get operations back up and running. But it could be so far off depending on what type of sector you're in, right? Financial services or healthcare, if you have a few hours of downtime, there's regulatory consequences, there's commercial damage, there's brand reputation that's put into place. And then if you're a small business, family owned business, you could have a longer outage, but that customer loyalty can be kind of thin. And the research in terms of if I'm Googling, a certain product or service offering that you have and your website is down, well, I might just go off and find, okay, well, what's the next best thing, right? So when it comes to like that downtime and how long it is for business, it's going to really come down to what business are you in? Who are your customers? What services are you offering? and then working back from that in terms of understanding what should be the right proper SLAs that we should put in place in terms of making sure that we have the right processes for getting our operations back online. So for them, it really does just kind of depend for a lot of these companies that are looking and working through different types of crises.
SLA meaning service level agreement, of course.
Mhm.
I've got to ask one more thing just before we finish this first part of the interview. You're an advocate of women in technology. I've been writing the "There Are Not Enough Women in Technology" story since the 1990s, if not the late 80s. Why are we still talking about this in 2026? There must be something structural going on.
So it might not just be a structural, and I'll try to reframe this in a way, because for me, for someone that is a woman that has gone up through tech, I found my way probably in not the same avenue that most women would or most individuals would. So I think there is, number one, there's something that has to be said about, hey, you don't have to follow the same road or an actual playbook in order to get into the world of tech. Number two, I think there needs to be more probably promotion into the different roles that women can actually play a really strong part in when it comes to technology. So we spent a lot of time talking about, cyber recovery, crisis management, incident response, things of that nature. And everything that I've talked about, I think, I could thread the needle a little bit there that it comes down to communication. And communication is a fantastic skill to have. And because cybersecurity in general, it's a translation problem. It's something that nobody wants to talk about. It's technical teams that know and understand how serious the issue is. They understand the risk, but they struggle with making others, especially those that control the budget, truly feel it. And I think women can play a great part inside of that space to be able to tell a really good story about the data and how it moves and how it can make people act. And then the second portion of this is bringing perspective. Essentially, I'm a big, big believer that security teams, you need to have diversity in terms of the people that are working during a crisis, right? Because you don't want to be approaching the same problems from same angle, because that's what leads to blind spots. But if you have diversity in there, it's a nice operational advantage because now you have different ways in which you can attack that problem. You can think about it. You can know that attackers generally, they play off of the human emotion. Well, we can really kind of be confident in the ways that we're having these conversations and we're asking people questions about certain attributes. They're going to have different responses and different answers to it. So there is a big play there in terms of, number one, I think promoting and sharing women's stories in tech, and then sharing even at like a high school or grade school level, that there is this opportunity to go work in tech and that cybersecurity would be a really great role for women that they can excel in, would probably be a really great first start. And that's something that I'm a big proponent of. It's something that even here at Veeam, I've worked to do things called, it's called Empower Her, where we actually offer our own certification. We have a technical certification for our software to women that are looking to break into tech and to learn some of these skills around backup, disaster recovery, crisis management, incident planning. And so that can help them to kind of get a better understanding of what this field looks like. And then they can apply that to whatever role they're currently in now. So I think it's just, we need to just do a better job of actually making this known within the industry and speaking to young women, to start thinking about considering a role in tech.
And a very powerful point you made early on there is that, or in the middle there, is that getting these different perspectives, that there is a major, major business imperative there. Even if you're not the sort of person who wants to do the right thing, it will benefit your business getting different perspectives. And I think that's a great place to pause on, if we may, before we move into part two, which will be broadcast next week. So that's it for the first part of this interview. So thank you very much indeed for taking part, everybody else for listening. But there will be more Oh, yes. Come back next week when we'll talk about a number of other elements to security and what's likely to be happening in the near future with EmileeTellez. Emilee, in the meantime, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much.
And we will see you all next week.